On this channel, I've made whole dedicated videos to MÖRK BORG and a personal favourite of mine, Cyborg. But now it's time to go over a third MÖRK BORG inspired game. One that has a focus on a specific fantasy rather than just general fantasy or cyberpunk. And that is...
Well, howdy. Suppose you came here looking for the balloons, did you? But you got dollars instead.
And speaking of actual, if you want to be remaining above the snakes, then you best be handing whatever dollars you got in your pocket. Unless you want to meet my canister, and cash in as cold as a wagon tire. And if you want to come down to the last frontier and are hoping to stay among the willows, then you best not be a green-skinned chappy, because you'll find nothing but rough-faced church fellows with apple peelers crawling out of crowbar hotels. and much worse. So keep to the trails, no matter how dusty, and be ready for some milling on iron horses. Or, if you want to live long in this life, you're better off just be making tracks, boy. Yes, I know about Pirate Borg, it's been on my shelf, but it wouldn't be me if I didn't try to show you something other than what you've already seen before, rather than just retreading the same stuff. So, Frontier Scum, by Carl Druid. Took me far too long to say that, is a MÖRK BORG inspired system with a dark western setting. Its inspirations are tied to movies like The Quick and the Dead, Dead Man, and Bone Tomahawk. Yes, a dark west indeed if you've seen Bone Tomahawk. And I say MÖRK BORG inspired because, like the Borgs, it's also grim and brutal and uses a d20 plus your stat rolling system, but there are some subtle to some and significant to others changes that are worth checking out. So I'll be covering the book by looking at its mechanics, tables and presentation, and its setting, and a quick look at the adventure at the back. So, let's begin. On page 13, you'll find a checklist to make your character, going from rolling for your stats to choosing or rolling for your name. And already the MÖRK BORG veterans will notice a deviation here. Page 13? There are page numbers? There's even a content page? And if you're thinking, yeah, why are you pointing this out? Because the Borg games are notorious for giving you the book with the bookmarks and saying, good luck, son, and maybe an index at the back. Yes, my probably favourite of the bunch, Cyborg, does have page numbers, but it's not typical for Borg games to really help you along this much. But yes, the stats that you have in this game differ from the usual strength and presence and toughness, that kind of thing. You have grit, slick, wits, and luck. But character creation in this game goes in a super interesting direction beyond just stats and HP. You get to roll on not only what traits you have, physical and mental, but you also get to see what you are wanted for, whether the authorities want you dead or alive, and how much your bounty is worth. Also, unlike the other Borgs, Frontier Scum has a super fun addition in the form of backgrounds and skills. You get to roll a d12 to determine what background you have, which includes things like a discharged deputy, a factory cog, or even a ghoulish undertaker. And each one of these backgrounds gives you a d6 table to determine what items you get from your background, and a prompt for a skill that you gained because of your background. And the skills are super interesting. They're supposed to be quite specific, like instead of just survival or athletics as a skill, there's a list of example skills such as cheat at cards, forage for roots, dance on tables, bear wrestling, and precision vomiting. The bonus of skills is that if you do something that is to do with one of your skills, you make that roll with an advantage. This is an interesting deviation from just making stat rolls in the other Borgs. Now your character feels more rounded out, and the skills aren't generic enough so it gives someone an unfair and constant advantage like athletics or riding a horse or shooting your gun, you know, Western stuff. But that's not all. You can actually gain skills as you play. Whenever you roll a natural 20, you can choose to gain a skill or an ace, which are similar to omens or glitches from the other Borgs if you're aware of those. This means if you do something really well, you can gain that activity as a skill. So, if you manage to convince the sheriff that you're some young buxom barmaid instead of a 50-year-old prospector with a nat 20, then you can gain the disguise self skill. Or if you lob an apple, roll a nat 20 and knock them out, then you can gain the throw fruit skill. I'm not making that up, that's a listed skill. Maybe it was put there because of the whole like stocks and throwing tomatoes at people. I've only just thought of that now while reading off the script, but yeah, I think that's hilarious. As you might expect from the other Borgs, you get items, water and money, but you also roll for your stolen horse, a gun, and a hat. And because this is a Western game, the hat is much more than just fitting the theme. When you are damaged, you can choose to lose your hat to negate all damage, and you can then pick it up again, but you have to roll luck to see if the hat survived. And this is a blessed feature because guns in Frontier Scum can have exploding dice, meaning if you have a D6 repeater rifle and it rolls a 6, you can roll again. And of course, there aren't many people wearing nanoweave, and there weren't many heavily armored knights in the Old West. Except for the ones that are depicted on the Daily Errant newspaper, of course. So as a result, there isn't any armor to help reduce damage. Well, there's like one or two, but they're not that great. So the hat becomes your lifeline. But besides all this, it's the usual MÖRK BORG formula. Saying what you want to do, rolling a d20, adding a stat, doing so with advantage if you're skilled, rolling for damage, using aces if things go badly, and having a terrible time in game, but a grand time at the table. You'll find rules for being miserable, which is a cover-all condition that prevents you from regaining HP when resting, a rule to help condense a fray of punches like a bar brawl into just a single grit check, and being intoxicated, which is actually really cool because it temporarily swaps two of your stats instead of just having disadvantage, like being poisoned or something, which is really interesting because the first time you become drunk, you choose which stats you swap, and at that point, anytime you get intoxicated after that, those two same stats swap. So your smart ability and your physical ability, when you're drunk, those two things swap, which seems to make sense to me. But beyond the everyday mechanics, let's talk about the tables and the presentation of the game itself. The book shoots for an art-heavy vibe like MÖRK BORG games do, and I have to say, this is one of the best non-official pieces that I've seen. Normally when you see unofficial content for MÖRK BORG, it will basically look exactly like the game itself, or will go for a similar presentation. However, because this is an old Western setting, the presentation is absolutely perfect. The pages look like those catalogue-style old-timey adverts that you find in old-timey newspapers, complete with perfectly chosen art and, of course, uses of font and language. And not a page is wasted. Every page is dense with relevant rules, and the way character creation is laid out, it allows you to perfectly go from step 1 to the end, and it all just perfectly flows together. And there are super useful tables, like whatever you could imagine would be the bulk of running a Western-style game, it's all here. It even goes into stuff like the look, the name, and the personality of your horse. Do you want your horse to be brown, be a donkey, and also have an addiction to cigarettes? It's all here. The back of the book has a bunch of tables for odd jobs, bounties, loot in houses, pockets and tombs, and even strange relics, like a sword with an invisible blade. The creativity on display is fantastic, even stuff like your traits and how you gained your skill from your background, and even interesting stuff like what you notice when you first enter a saloon. Speaking of which, there's a really fun set of tables to determine what happens when you are out on a bender that covers stuff like what was won, what was lost, and who you now owe. You'll have a blast rolling on all these tables. There's so much perfectly curated creativity, and there aren't so many of these tables and so many specific instances like what's listed in Pirate Borg that you'll be overwhelmed. However, and this is going to seem baffling considering what praises I've already said, because I think it's just a me thing, and that is, I find the presentation of this book somewhat harder to navigate through than the likes of the other MÖRK BORG games. I know it sounds strange, but just look at this page. Now, I know you're looking at this picture in this video on your screen, but when I say everything is so densely placed to waste no space, do you see what I mean? The pages look so fitting for the intended aesthetic, but there's so much happening that it makes the eyes just wander, and again, it feels unfair because it's super faithful to the aesthetic. And that's probably the only quite weird complaint, but non-complaint, because it seems quite ill-fitting for a Borg-inspired game, and I'm pretty sure it's just me and my weird eyes or whatever, but don't mind me, I'm as crazy as a loon! The setting for Frontier Scum isn't just the Wild West as we know it. The game shows its hand pretty early in being something a bit more odd on the 5th and arguably the 4th page. The 4th page talks about Covert City, which is basically the main city with industrial power. It's the seat of hedonism that makes great strides in technology and medicine, born from the suffering and domination over the innocent. It even mentions a line that freight hoppers believe the Great Eternal Rail, as it's called, runs all the way to hell itself. The next page that I mentioned talks about Sunken Hill and Carcass County. Carcass County is an overgrown wall that borders the scrublands, with plants that will ensnare you. People are suggested to keep to the trails, lest you want to be devoured by the forest itself. And Sunken Hill is a vile, swampy graveyard that carries the stench of death, and winds that carry the sound of rattling chains and ghostly moans. People are buried deep in chained coffins, lest they crawl their way out of the bog into the land of the living. And
the Covet City Tombkeepers Association implores cemetery visitors hire a certified and licensed grave guide. Avoid the troubles of tomb bandits, miasmic delirium, morning sickness, ghouls, involuntary burial, and true ghouls.
there are even more super cool places to explore, like the deadly salt flats called the Scree Knives, and Fort Gullet, which is a city grasped by criminal clutches. This is all combined with a map and a matching aesthetic to create a beautifully grim west to explore. The map is shown as a point of interest map that includes the time and days it would take to get from one destination to the other, which are doubled on foot and are quartered by train. And there's something deeply wrong with all this talk of undead and the creations at Covet City, and nowhere is this better encapsulated than within the pages of the adventure. The Organ Rail. The Organ Rail presents the players as prisoners aboard a dark black iron train heading to Covet City to be hanged, but you've all luckily managed to smuggle an item with you into the cell where you've been handcuffed and stripped of everything else. Now, I'm not going to run through everything because there's something strange and interesting going on in this adventure that I would just spoil by saying here on this video, so I'd recommend you buy the product if you want to see. But I have to say, this adventure would not only make for a great one-shot, but would be a great way to start a campaign in this game, and when thinking about it, probably a campaign in any game really that involved some kind of train, whether it's fantasy, sci-fi, or whatever. You start the adventure caught, and of course you are motivated to escape to not be killed in Covet City, but as you explore the cars you can find your stuff and, potentially, escape with a bunch of money. Also, because it's set on a train, each section, each page, covers a car on the train in order, making it super easy to run the adventure for new and experienced GMs. And the cars get stranger and stranger as you try to get to the front of the train to slow it down enough so you can make your escape, with new strange dangers and run-ins with those who put you here to begin with. And you might be thinking, hang on, if there's strange dangers inside each of the carriages, then let's climb on top and walk along the top of each car instead. Well, luckily that has been accounted for. There are things like blood vultures and, of course, the risk of just falling off to your death to prevent you from just walking along and avoiding the entire adventure. To give a hint to those watching as to what you might find if you're considering buying this adventure, or this game in general, there is a mad scientist, syringes that give you miraculous healing, and stopping this train might not be as straightforward as you might think. All in all, if you watch my MÖRK BORG video, which you can see here, you'll see my mention of me thinking about my own setting for a MÖRK BORG inspired game and thought westerns would be perfect, and, well, when I did, this book already exists, and it is indeed perfect. We have games like Deadlands, which are of course very popular, but if you want a MÖRK BORG flavoured rules-like game with a strange West feel presented with beautifully fitting ways for the time period, then pick up this game. Thank you Carl Druid and those that worked on it, it's well worth your money. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video then please leave a like and leave a comment, maybe about whether or not you've played or read other MÖRK BORG games and whether you've even heard about this one. Also, if you'd like to see other MÖRK BORG or Cyborg content, then click the video on screen. I love you all and I'll see you next time, partner.